Hello and welcome to Mr. Ezra R's Scratch tutorial series. In this beginning Scratch tutorial, I'm going to cover the basics of the Scratch interface, getting some basic code blocks working, and the creation of a small, simple game with some basic left, right, up, down movement, random item spawning, and a win screen. So once you've created your Scratch your Scratch account, you're going to find yourself on the main Scratch page. What I want you to do is click up on your username found in the top right hand corner and scroll down until you find the My Stuff option. I'm just going to delete that old game there. This will give you an overview of all the different games or programs you worked on in Scratch. And what we're going to do is we're going to create a new project. And if you haven't used Scratch before, you won't have anything here. So I'm going to create a new project by clicking on the plus new project button. Now when Scratch loads up, there are a couple things that you should probably pay attention to right off the start. Right along the top here, we have our darker blue menu bar that kind of contains our main menu options. You can see Untitled 3 is the name of this project. So let's change that to My First Scratch Game. And also make sure to share it by clicking on the orange share button. If you're part of a Scratch classroom, sharing it will allow your instructor to see your game and take a look at your code, give you help as you need it. So let's click on share. And it's going to jump to this screen right here. There'll be a green bar across the top that says your project is now shared. And it has a little preview window, and you can write in instructions or notes and credits. Add it to a studio or copy the link to send the link to someone else. For right now, we want to get back into our game. So we're going to click on the See Inside, which means look at the code or look at how the game is built, just to get back to the screen we were previously at. You can now see that that orange button has turned to dark blue and says Shared. That's all we need to do for now. Scratch is an auto-saving program, so unless you lose your connection to the server, it should always be updating the save. Although you can always manually save by clicking on File Save Now or Save to your computer, and it'll save, I believe, an SC3 file. Now, what we're going to do is just take a look at the overall interface of Scratch, starting over on the right-hand side. So on the right-hand side, you can see we have Scratch right here. If I click on him with my mouse, I can move him around. Scratch, or this icon of a cat, is what's called a sprite. You can see it's named Sprite 1 down here in the Sprites palette. A sprite refers to any digital visual representation of an object. So it's a digital object that's a visual object, something that you can see. You can have animated sprites or just static sprites. That's what this is right now. It's just a static sprite. It doesn't move. But a sprite refers to any little digital object like this that is an image. So this area where the Scratch sprite sits is the actual program window. So this represents the thing that you are building or where your program is going to run, or in this case where our game is going to exist, and it's going to be played in this window. Now, really important thing to know is that you cannot change the dimensions of this window. All you can do is change the dimensions of the objects within it. So in order to make the game level larger, you would actually just be making all your game sprites smaller. We'll get into this a little bit more later. Just below this window, we have two other palettes. We have the Sprite Palette and we have the Stage Palette on the far right here. The Sprite Palette is where your sprite library is stored, so all the sprites in your game will appear as little icons in this lower area. And if you click on a sprite, it'll give you some basic information about some of the states of that sprite. So its name, let's call this guy Scratch because that's what his name is. Hit enter. Notice that it updates right here on the sprite name. Then we have his X position and Y position. We're going to get to that in a second. Whether it is visible or invisible. So if you toggle off the eye, he'll hide, and if you toggle it on, he'll show. The size of the sprite, so that's at 100% currently. And the direction, which is 90 degrees, which is 90 degrees to the left. Sprites in Scratch work on 0 degrees being up, 90 left, 180 down, and then it actually goes into negative degrees. So it's positive 180 and negative 180, even though it is a full 360 degree rotation here. Bring that back to 90. Stage refers to the backdrop. Right now, all we have is a blank backdrop. Moving over to the left or the center of the screen, this largest area, this is where your actual code is going to be written. So that's why it has the most space, because you're actually building out your game programming in this area. You can zoom in or zoom out. As of right now, we don't have any blocks in there, so we can't really get an idea of the scale of it. But there's lots of room to build your code inside the coding area or the block coding section. Moving over a little bit further, we have our tab system here. So we have code, costumes, and sound. Code is currently the active tab. And all your code blocks sit in this library on the far left-hand side. Now we have motion blocks, look blocks, sound blocks, event blocks, control blocks, sensing blocks, operators, variables, and your own custom blocks. Now, they're all divided by color, so it makes it really easy as you're building to understand what sort of blocks you're working with and what they might possibly do. You got those little visual cues. Scratch is really good at using visual cues to tell you what kind of blocks can click together or be nested inside of each other. And I'm going to talk about that as we kind of get going with the programming here in a little bit. If you click on the next tab is Costumes. Costumes refers to the actual visual aspects of your sprites, so the actual the drawing or the image itself. You can see that this little Scratch sprite has two costumes, a costume 1 and a costume 2. If you click on them, it changes what the costume is that's displayed there, and if we wanted to, we could animate it out later with some blocks. Sounds we're going to pretty much ignore. Don't need to look at those at this point. But costumes we will get into a little bit later. We're all just going to leave our basic tab as the code tab though, because that's where most of our work is going to be done. So I'm going to stop this video right now. That is an overview of the basic interface. And in the next video, we're going to start coding and modifying some of our sprites.